That's true. I mean, part of the success of the Sonic franchise, I don't think anybody would really argue, was Jim Carrey being in it.
Oh yeah.
And part of that is the fact that he hadn't done full on crazy Jim Carrey that people loved from the 90s and the early 2000s for so long, years and years. And suddenly, yeah, he's in his 60s now, there he is doing what he used to do. And boy, did it work.
Yeah, it's like, I think like Sonic is a good example of like a video game movie done right, and then like you have all of these bad examples in this, and like then you have and then you have the Mario movie coming out, which
Which looks amazing.
it looks amazing, and it looks amazing, and people really like how they're adapting it. But my main concern, because it looks amazing, but are people gonna actually, but like, are they actually gonna do like good with it? Because,
I think what they realised was, I don't know if you know, there's a Super Mario Brothers movie from the late 80s.
yeah,
That's one of the worst films you could ever see. I think they realised that they can't do things like Super Mario with human actors. You have to animate it, or it's just as it was originally, Bob Hoskins in a suit. And Chris Pratt is the lead Mario. Can you imagine Chris Pratt with a moustache and that costume on? It would have looked
Yeah.
ridiculous.
like, it looks amazing, but then this is me. This is not like what I've heard from other people. It's like, it looks like they're cramming a lot into one film. Which, like, it can look amazing, it can be fun, but then,
But if it works,
yeah, it's
they
like,
can extend and they can keep going. Yes, they've put everything in the kitchen sink in it. Donkey Kong's in it, all of the things. But they did that with Wreck-It Ralph.
yeah, it's like, there are good ways to do it, but are they gonna actually think about that? I haven't, I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of Mario, and I haven't seen the trailers fully, but, that's like someone else's concern.
Years and years ago, I was part of the development team that started up a computer game called Ratchet and Clank. And they did a film of that a couple of years ago. Nobody noticed. Nobody went to see it.
I actually did not know it had a film.
Yeah, there's a full movie. It's animated and it follows the story of the first game. But nobody noticed.
Yeah, I think I think I'll move on to the next question now.
Okay.
Okay, so I think I'll skip a couple of these because we're pretty far into recording. Okay, let's go to like a really interesting one to me. When you write something creative, do the ideas come to you immediately, or do you have inspiration? And when it comes to if you do have inspiration, like, what is your main source of inspiration?
I think when I write, if you turn to me and say you've got to get on with a script, I have to try and make the film in my head before I actually start. Or I have to be able to see in my mind how sequences play out. Literally, I have to try and put it together, because when you sit down, you've got to write, car comes in this way, cut to car going left, car hits wall, car blows up. Unless you see that, it's not going to make any sense unless you figured it out beforehand. So inspiration, if you like, comes through necessity. If you have a brief to fulfill and a point to get to, you have to constructively figure your way around the situations, and everything else becomes detail that you have to inject. to inform the story. So if you need, say there's a big heist going on, you have the characters get together, you have the characters start to fall out, they do the heist, there's repercussions. So that kind of becomes chapters. But you have to realize in those chapters you have to address who these people are, how they talk, what they say. You have to build on fragments. So inspiration comes through desperation, generally.
Yeah. I've never written anything professionally, but writing is a hobby of mine, which is why I took this course actually. But like when I'm writing, I'm always like because I don't have a brief to go on, but I'm trying to like fulfill an idea I have in my head. I always like look to how other people have done it and think, well, they did it that way, so I could take that and spin it into a way that I want to use it. And then that usually evolves into something cohesive. And like and then like most of the people that I show my work, they're always like, I like that you've included this. I think you should do that a bit more. Or
well, you're thinking it through. You're doing what I'm going on about, basically.
Yeah.
You're looking at it and you're making that story in your head visually to be able to put detail like that down.
yeah, I think like my main source of inspiration is usually what I'm watching at the time. Which is usually why when I'm writing a sci-fi story, I'm always looking at Doctor Who to see how Doctor Who did it, or how did Star Wars do it, because I'm thinking, well, we've had to do something right if it's so popular. So how can I take that, spin it for myself, and make it unique while also still having that element?
Oh yeah, that's exactly the way you should do it. When you look at Doctor Who, say, pick a Stephen Moffat episode, say Blink. You look at Blink, what do you take away from that as a writer?
It's like Blink is a really good episode because it's really simple. It's a really simple episode that does not go into, or does not like have too much technobabble, or like does not have too much. It doesn't. It explains itself, but doesn't explain itself for too long. It focuses on the action. It focuses on the concept that's being introduced. It's a very simple story that's like, the situation is complicated, and you have to figure it out. And the focus of the story, the people who are trying to figure out the mystery, are then like just as lost as the audience.
Yeah, and the twist is clever. Moffat's way of writing is he'll figure out a situation that deeply unnerves you. If you look at Blink, if you look at The Empty Child, if you look at Silence in the Library, there's all an underlying fear there of what you don't understand. So look at The Empty Child. The solution to that is it's really a little kid, and they've got to bring him back to what he was. Blink is figuring out how to trap the angels with their own device. So if there's something you can't look at, and if you look at it, you will be frozen and they'll get you. What if they looked at each other? Then they become frozen in time. That's how he got out of that. And Silence in the Library was, how do you catch a shadow? What if the shadow can catch you?
Going back to Blink, it's a good. In my eyes, it's a like. What I take away from it is that you always want to keep your audience, like, you want to make sure your audience follows along, but you want to make them as lost as the characters are meant to be. You don't want to give them too much or too little information, because too little information can make them frustrated, but too much can make them like, oh, this is too predictable.
Sure. It can get to a point when you're going round in circles trying to figure out how to solve things. Part of the thing I've always been told is figure out the solution before you get to the problem.
Yeah. I think that's a good way of going around it, because a problem I always have in writing is that I come up with a really good scenario in my head, but then I'm like, well, there's this scenario, and I've set up the stakes, but like, now, how do I realistically make sure that the characters actually get out of it? And then that's an issue I always have, because I'm trying to think. I don't want to make it seem contrived. I don't want to make it seem like I don't want to make it seem like I made it up at the last moment.
No, that's a danger, but let me explain something about writing a book, for example. I've just got a novel out that's Doctor Who related. And the strange thing happened, it's 4 short stories. And I did the first one, and the editor said, okay, that's really good. And the second one and the third one introduced a character more strongly than is in the first story, and she suddenly became the favourite element of the whole thing with the editors. And they said, this is a really good character. We want you to go back and refocus the first story so she's more prominent. So it was odd, because she was very much meant to be a background character, but as I wrote it, she evolved and got a voice, if you like, that was distinctly hers. And I had to go back and re-energize the first story to make it more in keeping with how she was later on. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah. I think like, as writers, like writers in general, when they write down something, they have a lot of ideas, and then they don't know how to manage those ideas. So when you're writing something and your focus is like plan A, and you like, and then like you have this like very cohesive story, but then you include another detail that people are really interested in, and you don't follow up on that. People are always like, well, why didn't you go and do that? And then like you have to think, well, I didn't think of it. Then, like you said, when your editors told you to go back and rewrite the first story, it's like you didn't think it could actually go that way.
No, because I set out with an agenda in terms of the story structure, and this character wasn't that prominent, but as I say, she became popular, and now I've just finished the second book, and she's practically the lead, and that was really not what I planned.
Yeah, it's like sometimes when you're writing something you don't even plan can just become the focus of it all.
Yeah. That's a happy accident.
Yeah, it's like sometimes not everything you have in mind is what you're going to finish with.
True.
Because you can get more, or you can think, oh, this is a bit unnecessary, so I can just cut it out. But then, like, when I'm writing, I always have someone else to bounce off of. Because
that's the best way.
yeah, and it's like, well, if you want to do this, then how about we take that idea and we incorporate it here, or we take that idea and use it later. To me, it's all about, when you have these ideas for events or things you want to do, you need to figure out when it's going to happen, when you want to do it, and then when that happens, you can go back and be like, I could include more of this, or it's like it's always about having like a basic plan and then sorting it out.
You have to let it evolve, and things can always go in a different direction that you've never predicted and become better for it.
Yeah. So, I think this is gonna be the second to last question.
Okay.
With shows like The Boys and Invincible becoming more common, as deconstructions of the typical ideas of a hero and in other cases the genre as a whole, what is your stance on this? Do you think they've been a bit overdone, or and outside their welcome, or do you think that they're good, like they're good staples of fiction?
Well, I use the phrase happy accidents. I think things like The Boys weren't expected to take off like that. There's another series, I don't know if you've seen, called The Umbrella Academy.
I've heard of it, haven't seen it though.
There's Doom Patrol. These are big budget series. Nobody expected them to actually have any sense of longevity. There's I think it's Legends of Tomorrow.
I have seen a couple episodes of that.
Yeah, because Arthur Darvill, who was Rory with Matt Smith's Doctor, went off to do that. And he thought it will last a year. And by the fourth year, he wanted to come home. So I think it ran for about 8 series, something like that.
Yeah, it's like, because with Doctor Who, William Hartnell, when he first took up the role, was like, it won't last too long, but he took it anyways because he wanted the role.
Nobody thought it would last beyond 13 episodes because that was what the drama department committed to.
Yeah, and then
the Daleks happened.
And then by like the third year, he was tired, he was sick, he could not continue.
He was ill, he had vascular dementia.
Yeah. And
he wasn't very old, he was about 56.
It's like sometimes that which is unexpected is usually what becomes, well, usually like goes on and continues.
I knew the producer who did the last series with William Hartnell and continued into season 5. So he introduced Patrick Troughton. And, I did say, where did that idea come from? And it was a think tank. It was a script editor, the producer, and a couple of writers trying to figure out how they could keep the series going. And I think the decision was made to do that around about series 3 because there was a story called The Celestial Toymaker, and they were going to write William Hartnell out at that point, but they decided to keep him going while they tried to find another actor, and they wound up with Patrick Troughton, who was probably the best Doctor Who.
Yeah, actually, I can see why people think Patrick Troughton is good, and like even modern doctors like Matt Smith.
They go back, yeah.
Yeah,
like
like Matt Smith, I think, has openly admitted that he took inspiration from Patrick Troughton's.
That's true.
Interpretation.
You'll find that's happened with Ncuti. It happened with Jodie. If you look at Jodie, she's like a female Patrick Troughton.
Yeah, whether that's done good or not, I won't say. I think like my opinions on Jodie's Doctor is that the character was good, the writing was less than stellar.
She was let down.
Yeah.
If you took, well, let's put it like this: if you took the way she portrayed the Doctor and think of her in episodes like Blink, Silence of the Library, it would have been a very different situation.
Yeah, I think that, like, again, something that's unexpected will always somehow live on. No one expected Doctor Who to go beyond 3 years, to go beyond what it already was. But then we have like this really good formula where the character can just come back as another actor, and then
Well, don't kid yourself. It's been on the cusp of cancellation many times.
Yeah.
Series 3, and they were going to kill it off. Patrick Troughton, if he didn't work, if the audience didn't accept him. At the end of Troughton's era, they said, well, how are we going to keep this going? Because everybody was exhausted.
Yeah,
And
and
one of the producers said, let's go to colour half the series, because it was on 39 weeks of the year, which is an epic production schedule.
yeah, and yeah, it has been on cancellation, but but like, I'm trying to word myself better now. Okay. Even when it was like on for, even when it was actually cancelled for a couple of years, there was still like, there's still content like books, eventually be audio stories.
But that was just catering to an audience that was dwindling.
Yeah. But then like you have The Boys and you have Invincible, you have like all of these like this like niche deconstruction of this like niche deconstruction of like the superhero genre.
But they are always on the edge of being taken off the air. If The Boys hadn't worked, it would have gone after 6 episodes. There are loads of series where they make the whole series, but they take them off because audiences hate them. Doctor Who's lucky that it's got 60 years of history. Nothing else has ever had that.
Yeah. With like The Boys, okay. So with The Boys, I think I don't think people expected The Boys to do good at all because they read the comic book and were like, this sucks.
Well, there's things in the comic book which they said they'll never do that, like the baby with the laser eyes that starts cutting people in half. So people didn't believe they'd done that as they watched it. The Boys has got progressively more outrageous, and that's on purpose. They're really trying to do the comic as it was. But I think the 4th series is going to be the last one from what I hear.
From what I think is that the first 2 series of The Boys were like trying to reimagine what the comic was trying to communicate, but they were also trying to implement other ideas into it because The Boys was made by someone who hates superheroes,
Oh yeah.
but then the TV show was made by someone who doesn't hate superheroes but is still critical of them. And then I think that on its own is better because now they have someone who's less biased towards one side, so they can like go. The concept of a hero is good, but like there's also people where like if you put people who aren't fit towards that in that position, that's not going to be good at all, is it?
Well, there's a writer called Garth Ennis who did a thing years ago called Dare, and Dan Dare was a comic hero for kids in the 1950s. That's when the first real drive of British sci-fi comics happened, with the Eagle. Now, Eagle comic was revived when 2000 AD came in the 70s, but it lasted until the 60s. And Dan Dare was the focal point. He was the hero, this rocket ship captain with his crew. Garth Ennis did Dare, and he subverted it. So he made Dan Dare a drunk, lying in the gutter, trying to get him back to what he was. And that's the mentality that's there with The Boys. It subverts the expectation of what you think a superhero is.
Yeah, Garth Ennis also wrote the Boys comic. I think.
I don't think he's involved in the TV version.
Yeah.
Though.
I haven't read the comic fully because I could not stomach it. Like, I'll admit that. But
It's an acquired taste.
yeah, and then when I look at the TV show, it's like okay, like I'm thinking the TV show is good because they aren't actively mocking like tropes from they're subverting them, but they aren't mocking them.
No, that's true.
Yeah, which is like exactly what the comic book. It's actually exactly what the comic book did. And
But
while
do you not think The Boys is actually subverting it to the point where the baddies are actually more fallible than the heroes?
I think that well, that question on its own opens up another question, like who is the bad guy? Is Homelander the bad guy, or is Billy Butcher the bad guy?
That's the point of the series. That's what the writers are trying to do, is everybody's as bad as each other, basically.
Yeah, it's like going back to the idea of enabling.
Yeah.
Because because the writers don't want you to be like Billy Butcher or Homelander, but they want you to be better than those two or like other members of the cast. They give the characters flaws, so the audience can see those flaws and go, "That's not a good person."
That's true.
Yeah, and like,
Do you not think Series 3 was really pushing the boundaries of it?
I think that Series 3, it pushed the boundaries in a good way, because it progressed the plot in a believable way in my eyes, with Soldier Boy, and it took out like a lot of disgusting things from the comics and readapted them to actually being enjoyable. But at this point, it's also like, at this point, it's like the audience is comfortable with the concept of The Boys, so they're like adapting the more extreme things from the comics, but still toning them down, so it's still enjoyable to people who weren't too fond of the comics.
Well, it's like Star Trek. If you think about that, when that first started in '66, nothing had been quite like that before in terms of attitude over the stories they were telling. Yeah, there had been spaceship sagas, there had been movies like Forbidden Planet in the 30s